Okay. Am I unmuted now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Director Wray, thank you for being here. I don't envy you your job at all. For those of us been here a long time, we've seen the changes, dramatic changes that go on in what you face. You've always spoken about the truth about the threat of domestic terrorism, and I know that sometimes it's been politically difficult to do so. You have to deal with reality. You can't deal with the politics. So I'll ask you a few quick questions. Begin with, do you stand by your previous testimony that white supremacist extremism is the dominant, most persistent source of domestic terrorism threats we face today?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of the question, which I think may be the key part, so I just want to make sure.
Right. Probably, do you stand by your previous testimony that white supremacist extremism is the dominant, most persistent source of domestic terrorism threats we face today?
I would certainly say, as I think I've said consistently in the past, that racially motivated violent extremism, specifically of the sort that advocates for the superiority of the white race, is a persistent, evolving threat. It's the biggest chunk of our racially motivated violent extremism cases for sure, and racially motivated violent extremism is the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism portfolio, if you will, overall. I will also say that the same group of people we're talking about have been responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last, say, decade.
And when I look at what happened on January 6th, it appears that right-wing white supremacist groups played an instrumental role in the violent assault. Is that your conclusion also?
Well, let me answer that this way. I think we're basically saying the same thing. I mean, we don't tend to think, we at the FBI don't tend to think of violent extremism in terms of right, left. You know, that's not a spectrum that we look at. What I would say is that it is clear, as I think I said to Chairman Durbin, that a large and growing number of the people that we have arrested so far in connection with the 6th are what we would call militia violent extremism, militia violent extremists, and then there have been some already that have emerged who I would have put in the racially motivated violent extremist bucket, again advocating for the spirit of the white race.
And I understand from your testimony previously that you did not see Antifa or left-wing groups playing a significant role in the January 6th insurrection.
Certainly, while we're equal opportunity and looking for violent extremism of any ideology, we have not to date seen any evidence of anarchist violent extremists or people subscribing to Antifa in connection with the 6th. That doesn't mean we're not looking, and we'll continue to look, but at the moment we have not seen that.
So what you do is you look, as somebody in law enforcement should, you look at where the crime was and who committed it, and you go after that, not from some kind of political vendetta, but if you committed the crime, we'll go after you. Is that too simplistic a way of stating it?
No, not simplistic at all, and I think a very, very important point that you're making there, and something that's very important to us at the FBI. We focus on the violence and the violations of federal law, and then the ideology comes into it as a further piece of the puzzle as we build out the case. But our focus is on the violence. We don't care what ideology motivates somebody, as Judge Garland, I think, himself said just last week. We don't care whether it's left, right, up, down, diagonal, or any other way. If the ideology is motivating violence and it violates federal law, we're coming after it.
Well, I know you're going to come before our Appropriations Committee, Senator Durbin, higher on that, and others for a classified briefing. And so I won't go into some of the classified parts. But we are going to talk to you, and I certainly, as chair of that committee, very interested in resources. You got a finite number of resources, and you have an infinite number of problems. So you have to prioritize them. I'd heard reports that the previous administration diverted FBI resources away from countering white supremacist violence toward an objectively lesser threat of left-wing violence. Were you directed at all to shift resources away from right-wing extremists?
We did not receive direction to, nor did we separate or divert resources away from tackling racially motivated violent extremism, white, over to anarchist violent extremism or anything along those lines. In fact, as I've said, I elevated racially motivated violent extremism, the vast majority of which is of what you would call white supremacist violence, to our highest threat priority where it has stayed, and that drives resources, that drives the collection requirements for all of our field offices, and I think the results speak for themselves. We have significantly grown the number of investigations and arrests in the category that you're asking about. It was up to about 1,400 by the end of last year, and it's up to about 2,000 now, which is doubled where it was at the pace when I started this job.
Well, and that's why I would expect you to go where the crimes are and go after it. But we've seen a lot of hate crime, certainly concerns of the hate crimes against Asian Americans. I was the lead co-sponsor of the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention. But now, when we see the increases, a recent FBI report indicates that 87% of law enforcement agencies participating in the FBI's hate crime data collection have reported 0 hate crime incidents within their jurisdictions. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, certainly we are constantly trying to improve the quality and quantity of reporting on hate crimes. I think we know that historically hate crimes are underreported. Having said that, it's not necessarily the case that every department is out there in the country is going to have had a hate crime in its jurisdiction in the course of any given year. So we've focused a little bit less on whether the percentage of departments that report it. We do want the percentage of departments who are cooperating and voluntarily responding to go up, and we focus more on whether or not the growth in the number of hate crimes reported overall seems to be building or not.
Certainly, I have other questions for the record, but you've testified before about a fusion cell developed to address both hate crimes and domestic terrorism. Has that been helpful?
It has. So what you're referring to is something that I put in place, I guess, about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago. I created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell, which brought together, because a lot of these crimes could fit either into a domestic terrorism bucket or a hate crimes bucket. And what I was worried about was making sure that within the FBI we didn't have a left-hand, right-hand problem. And so we brought together people focusing on both into a single fusion cell with the goal of trying to be proactive against some of the threats that are coming. And one example that I'll cite that we're particularly pleased with, which I think is an indication of the success the cell is having, we were able to get in front of and prevent an attempted, I think, explosives attack on a synagogue in Colorado. And that, I think, is largely a credit to the fusion cell, which was able to kind of help us figure out how to get in front of those kinds of attacks.
Thank you, Senator Leahy.
Thank you.